Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 13. We are almost there. We literally have like 3 more weeks and we're done. This week, we're going to talk about chapter 25, which is the urinary system. And then we're going to start on chapter 23, which is the digestive system. This week's lab, we're going to be looking at slides and then also some little kidneys for dissection, which is super exciting. And this weekend, we will have the homework for the urinary system, chapter 25, due on Sunday, and a PhysioX from my lab in mastering on the urinary system. We've, of course, got our crash course videos on these guys. So yeah, let's see, what else we got? I need to link Lee's histology for this one because there are some really great slides of some kidney and ureter tissue. To the to-do list. And I'm going to take a look at those during lecture today, as well as our good friend, Mr. Complete Anatomy, which is similar to Visible Body, which you can also get. I think Visible Body you can get maybe for free till the end of the semester, so look into that. All right, you guys. Chapter 25, the urinary system. Possibly my favorite body system, because the kidney and its microscopic structures are just so like fascinating, just really elegantly designed. You'll see. It's really cool. So let's get into it. The urinary system has a bunch of different functions. We think of it as being what produces urine, which is true. It's basically going to be filtering the blood, taking out toxins and everything that we don't want, waste products, concentrating them to be excreted from the body. But it also, while doing that, is going to basically, by picking and choosing what it decides to put into the urine, it's going to help to regulate the concentration of ions in your blood plasma. It's going to regulate your blood volume by controlling the amount of water that it takes out, which is going to affect your blood pressure, right? The more blood volume you have, the higher your blood pressure is. So your kidneys are very important in maintaining healthy blood pressure. It adjusts for the volume of water lost in the urine, so it keeps you hydrated, right? It's going to contribute to your blood pH by filtering out those hydrogen ions that make your blood acidic. It helps you to conserve valuable nutrients. So when it's filtering the plasma, which might be carrying important stuff that we don't want to get rid of, you will actually reabsorb that through these beautiful, elegant processes that we're going to talk about today. At the same time, we're going to eliminate the wastes that we don't want. It's going to get rid of hormones that are circulating through your blood. So hormones go from their endocrine glands to their target organ, but they may continue on through the bloodstream and they would just travel through there continually until they break down, unless they were filtered by the kidneys. So the kidneys are actually going to go ahead and remove those excess hormones so you have a clean slate. And then, of course, we are going to help to detoxify poisons with the kidneys. The liver is very important for detoxifying the blood, but the kidneys do as well. All right. Your kidneys, in case you didn't know, are located in the back wall of your abdominal cavity, and they're actually not even in the peritoneal cavity where the rest of your viscera, your digestive system mostly resides. They're actually posterior to and outside of that parietal pleura, believe it or not. So they're actually kind of embedded in the back wall, right up against your last ribs, your last 2 ribs. So they're actually like right there at your back, right in the middle of your back, on either side of your spine. So watch out for that region because they are very delicate organs, right? We don't want to damage them. So each of your kidneys is served by a renal artery and a renal vein, which we looked at when we talked about the blood vessels of the body, right? These come directly from the vena cava, the inferior vena cava and the descending or abdominal aorta, respectively. I guess not respectively, the renal artery comes from the abdominal aorta and the renal vein comes from the inferior vena cava. The kidney's function is to filter the blood plasma, right? So your blood is a solvent of plasma, which contains water and electrolytes and proteins. And then your blood cells are also in the plasma, the formed elements of your blood, right? So your blood contains the plasma element and then the blood cells. Your kidneys are not doing anything with your blood cells. They're just taking that solvent, just the plasma out and filtering that, okay? And once they filter that into a filtrate, that filtrate, whatever your kidneys have decided is going to be going away, is going to filter into your ureters, which are the tubes that go from your kidneys down to your bladder. And then it will be excreted from the body as urine. Your kidney's main external structures. Let's take a look at those. We've got the hilum of the kidneys. So your kidneys, just like your lymph nodes and your spleen and your lungs, all of these we have seen have a hilum, which is basically just like a little indentation where big tubes go in, right? So in the case of your lungs, that was your pulmonary arteries and veins, as well as your primary bronchi, right? For your kidneys, it's going to be your renal artery and vein, and the place where the ureter exits the kidney on its way down to the bladder, right? If you were to cut a kidney in half lengthwise and look at the inside, you would notice that it has a cortex and a medulla, much like some other structures that we've encountered so far in the human body. The brain comes to mind, right? The cerebral cortex is just the outer part of the brain. And then the adrenal glands, which are actually sitting right on top of these kidneys. They also have an outer cortex and an inner medulla. Your kidneys do as well. So this is the renal cortex here. Let's color code. There's a fly in here. He's like trying to get on my train. I'm gonna freak out. Please go away. All right, so the hilum, which I will go ahead and make yellow for now, is basically this part right here, where your big vessels and other important tubes go in and out. The renal cortex is basically this whole outer part, right? It's going to be basically everything like from here to here, all of this and all the way around. The medulla is the inner part, okay? So like from here to here and all the way around. The medulla has these important structures within it, you'll notice, okay? Within the medulla, you have what are called renal pyramids. Which are these guys right here. So you have multiple of these guys, right? Throughout the entire thing. And those renal pyramids actually have the microscopic structures of the filtration in them. And they basically shuttle all of the waste products, all the filtrate after the filtration has been done, into what is called the renal pelvis, which is this whole guy right here. And this renal pelvis is going to funnel down into the ureter. Okay, so I have one more color. Here we go. The ureter. Okay, let me pick up the slack here, Ashley. Renal medulla, cortex, pyramid, pelvis, and ureter. Okay, all color-coded and nice. All right, so this is basically saying the same thing, but with a different image so that you can see in a slightly different style, the same exact thing. Okay, so once again, the hilum being the region right here where the major vessels and tubes exit and enter the kidney. The cortex, which is everything from here to here, all the way around. The medulla, which is everything interior to that. And the renal pyramid, ids, plural, which are in the medulla, and are these guys right here. See how they are triangular / pyramid shaped. And also notice the striations here. We have these lines. That's actually really important. It's more squiggly in the cortex and more lined in the medulla, namely in the renal pyramids, which I'm wondering if these are labeled here. The renal pelvis, where the filtrate ends up collecting and which funnels down into the ureter. And again, this is reflected on both the right and left side, right? Because you have a right and a left kidney. Okay. This also shows you a little bit more detail about the blood supply of the kidney at large. So from the aorta to the renal artery, which of course you need to know because we already learned that, right? We go into smaller and smaller vessels until we get to the afferent arteriole, then the what is called the glomerulus, which is a really fun word and a really cool structure that we're going to look at here, which is basically the capillary beds of the kidney, within the kidney, where this filtration actually happens, which continues on to become the efferent arteriole, larger and larger vessels, venules into larger and larger veins until we get to the renal vein and the inferior vena cava, which we already learned about, right? So the ones that you should know for this are these. Don't worry about the intermediate stuff so much. But you have the renal vein and the renal artery that go into the kidney and get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you get to these little capillary beds, and you have many, many, many of these little capillary beds, and you have filtration happening at each, out here in the cortex, okay? So this is happening in the cortex, okay? All right, did you get to see the fly that time? I think I got it. I'm not sure. Okay, so one more picture showing the exact same thing. Cortex on the outside, medulla on the inside, pyramids within the medulla, emptying into the renal pelvis, which basically funnels down into the ureter, okay? I guess I'll underline the important stuff here. cortex, medulla, renal pyramid, ureter, hilum, renal pelvis. Don't worry about the rest of this stuff, okay? Just the underlined things. All right. The smallest functional unit of your kidneys is called the nephron, okay? This liney, striated appearance of the medulla is not by accident. It's not an artistic choice by whoever made this illustration. It is, in fact, part of the nephron. So the nephron extends across both the cortex and the medulla. The cortex part has a lot more coiling of the nephron, and the medulla contains these long tubes that extend kind of parallel to each other down towards the renal pelvis, okay? So basically, if you take a little chunk of the renal pyramid and the cortex, like that, it would look like this, which would look like this. Okay, so this is the outside, this is the capsule of the kidney, this is the cortex, this is the medulla. And as you can see, if you'll notice, the nephron is the yellow tube that's squiggling all around in here. It extends across the cortex and into the medulla. Okay, so you have millions, literally millions of these things all throughout both of your kidneys. Okay, the squiggly part of the tube is up in the cortex, and it's also where your little capillary beds are, way up here in the cortex. And then these longer parallel tubes, which are part of the same nephron, are extending down into the renal pyramids, where they give it this striated appearance, okay? So the nephrons are the smallest functional units of the kidneys. They are the ones that do this filtration of the blood plasma. They are the ones that decide what goes into the urine and what stays in the body. We are reabsorbing waste. So the nephron itself contains that filtrate that's going to become the urine, right? So when the nephron reabsorbs stuff, it's basically taking on wastes to excrete out of the body. And the nephron secretes good stuff that we want to keep in the body, okay? So stuff that you want to throw away, you put in the nephron, and stuff that you want to keep, you take out of the nephron, okay? Those wastes, that filtrate, ends up going down long tubes and collecting in the renal pelvis here, which basically funnels into the ureter down here, okay? Okay. So focus now on this yellow tube that is traveling all up and down the cortex and the medulla here, okay? I'm going to switch to the next slide where we're going to basically isolate that by itself, okay? So here is what that tube looks like by itself and with some of its blood vessels, okay? So the tube starts in this weird ball, and then it has a squiggly part, and then a long parallel part that extends down into the medulla, another squiggly part, and then it connects to another long tube that goes all the way down the medulla to the renal pelvis. Okay, so this is the part that basically deposits whatever is left waste-wise into the renal pelvis to be excreted as urine. Okay, this capsule, this round part up here at the front of the nephron, is called the renal corpuscle. Okay, the renal corpuscle is this whole shebang here, okay? It is made up of two different parts, which are the glomerulus, which is the actual capillary bed where the filtration occurs, where we're actually going to be pulling the plasma out to filter it, and the glomerular capsule, the glomerular capsule. You may also see it online or elsewhere as the Bowman's capsule. Okay, so the Bowman's capsule is literally a capsule of connective tissue that surrounds this capillary bed. Okay, so it's a capsule around the capillary bed, and literally the pressure inside of the capillary bed, inside of the capsule, I should say, that pressure that's inside of the capsule pulls the plasma out of the capillary bed and into the intercapsular space, okay? So the intercapsular space in this picture is this here. So you're literally pulling the blood plasma out of the capillaries and into the capsule, okay? So out of the glomerulus and into the glomerular capsule. Everything that's been pulled out of the glomerulus now, of that capillary bed that is the glomerulus, is now going to travel down this convoluted tube system where stuff is going to be pulled out and put back in to the filtrate that will become the urine, okay? So the first part of the rest of the nephron is the proximal convoluted tubule. It is proximal to the renal corpuscle, okay? It's proximal to the glomerulus. Let me make sure that I have my stuff underlined. Glomerular capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule is basically from here to here, okay? After the proximal convoluted tubule, which is responsible for reabsorption and secretion of various things, which we will talk about, you come across this long skinny part that extends down into the renal pyramid in the medulla and then comes back up. And we call it the loop of Henle, okay? You may see the two sides of it be referred to as the descending limb or the descending loop of Henle, and the ascending limb or the ascending loop of Henle, or it may be called the loop of the nephron, but whatever. The loop is the loop of the nephron. It is from here to here. And it can be called the loop of Henle, the loop of the nephron, the descending limb of the loop of the nephron, the descending limb of the loop of Henle, the descending loop of Henle, the ascending loop of Henle. You get those terms together and you'll be fine. Finally, you have the distal convoluted tubule, which is from approximately here to here. Okay, so these convoluted tubules, convoluted as in tangled or complicated, right? So you have a proximal one that's closer to the glomerulus and a distal one. And they are responsible for reabsorbing and secreting different things, which is important. Finally, at the end of the line, everything that's left over inside of this tube goes down into the collecting duct, okay? Which is this guy right here, okay? The distal convoluted tubule I had in red. All the way over there, okay. All right, you will also notice here that the glomerulus, this capillary bed, is not like other capillary beds that we have talked about so far. Other capillary beds that we have talked about so far start with an arteriole and then transition into a venule, right? This capillary bed, the glomerulus, it starts with an arteriole called an afferent arteriole and terminates in another arteriole, the efferent arteriole. Okay, so the blood supply here is coming from that renal artery. It is going into a very, very small capillary structure, but the blood inside of it is still oxygenated because we're not dealing in gas exchange here. We're just dealing in filtration of the plasma for other things, for larger molecules, right? So we're pulling the plasma out of this arterial blood we are going to filter that plasma from the arterial blood, and then that clean arterial blood will continue on to the rest of the nephron. As it continues on to the rest of the nephron, we have more capillaries that will basically feed the actual tissues surrounding the nephron and the nephron itself. So you have cells here in the walls of the nephron itself that are actually like, they're basically like ion pumps, or they're molecule pumps that are pumping things back and forth in and out of the nephron. They need to be fed, they need nutrients, they need oxygen, and they need to have their carbon dioxide and waste removed, right? So those cells are what is going to cause the blood to go from being oxygenated to deoxygenated. At the same time, we are depositing stuff that we want to keep back into the bloodstream. We are pulling more stuff out of the bloodstream and putting it in the nephron. That's all happening here between the proximal and distal convoluted tubules, ultimately resulting in deoxygenated blood, which contains everything that we decided not to discard in the urine, which is going to end up going back out of the kidney via the renal vein, okay? So the renal artery comes in, gets smaller and smaller and smaller, turns into the afferent arteriole, which enters the glomerular capsule. You've got a little capillary bed there that we call the glomerulus. Once all of the plasma has been, or much of the plasma, some of the plasma has been pulled out of this arterial blood, that arterial blood continues on into the efferent arteriole, and that arteriole is going to continue and basically wrap around and get super tangled up in the remainder of the nephron, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. And this is how you have reabsorption and secretion of all of the stuff in your blood. You're filtering the plasma here. It's kind of like cleaning out your closet. You pull everything out first, right? You pull everything out. And then most of that stuff is going to go back in, right? Going back in, the closet being your body, putting stuff back into your body happens by secreting them out of the nephron and into the surrounding blood vessels, which are called the peritubular capillaries, by the way. Okay, so these peritubular capillaries are extremely important because they are where the stuff that we want to keep goes back into the bloodstream. Okay, you need to know about your afferent and efferent arterioles, and you should know about your renal artery and your renal vein. Okay, the nephron, again, has technically 4 specific functions going on here, okay? You have filtration. That happens inside of the glomerular capsule, okay? So you're filtering the blood within the glomerular capsule. You're pulling the plasma out of the glomerulus, okay? Which that blood is coming from the afferent arteriole and will leave via the efferent arteriole. Okay, remember afferent comes first, efferent, think E as an exit, okay? And remember, some of you were mixed up on your exams about plasma versus the formed elements of the blood. The plasma, which was this part in that picture here, is everything except for your blood cells, right? So your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets, all of those things are in this red part, right? And the plasma just contains the water, the electrolytes, and proteins, all the stuff that we are pulling out of the blood here. Your red blood cells and white blood cells are too big to pass through the openings in the capillaries of the glomerulus. Okay, so they stay. And then just a portion of the plasma gets pulled out to be filtered. And that filtration only happens in the renal corpuscle, which is the glomerulus wrapped in the glomerular capsule. Okay. Filtration mostly deals in water, sugar, and nitrogenous wastes, okay, so far. Reabsorption and secretion really happen in both the proximal and distal convoluted tubules, but you have more reabsorption happening in the proximal convoluted tubule, okay? So in the proximal convoluted tubule, which is like from here to here in this picture, it's too short, oversimplified. It is where you're going to have some water be reabsorbed by the body. You're going to have ions and molecules, which will go back into the bloodstream via those paratubular capillaries, right? So you're going to have water and ions and molecules being sucked out of this proximal convoluted tubule and back into these capillaries, which goes back into the bloodstream. So basically you're keeping this stuff, right? We're putting it back in the body, we're keeping it. We changed our minds, right? Or you pulled it out of the closet and you decide you want to keep it, so you're going to put it back in to organize it. Secretion, for the most part, happens in the distal convoluted tubule, and it deals in those hydrogen ions that you want to take out to maintain the pH of the blood. Creatine, which is a molecule involved in ATP recycling and a weird supplement that bodybuilders use that you don't really need. Other drugs and toxins. So all of that stuff is going to be secreted back into the nephron to be excreted as waste. And excretion is what we call the movement of these waste products out of the body. Okay, so don't get it twisted. When something is reabsorbed at the nephron, it's being reabsorbed out back into the body. Back into the blood. To secrete something is to take it from the blood and put it into the nephron. And to excrete something is to discard it from the body. Okay, so we excrete urine, we excrete feces, we excrete mucus, we excrete sweat. All of those things that are like leaving the body in one way or another, that is excretion, okay? Secretion is stuff that is still happening inside of the body. It's just going from one place in an outward direction, okay, towards excretion, okay? All right, the blood supply of the nephron. I want you to notice actually here. So this is a super oversimplified image of the nephron. You've got your renal corpuscle, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, which reaches down into the medulla, and the distal convoluted tubule, which ends up going into that collecting duct. To the ureter, I should say, to the renal pelvis, to the ureter, to the bladder, and out, right? Okay. And that's heading in this direction towards that renal pelvis. Okay. So notice this very linear depiction of the nephron. This isn't how actual nephrons look. In fact, nephrons look a little bit more like this. So look how like looped and coiled it is on all over itself. So the glomerular capsule or the renal corpuscle is actually like kind of in the middle here. That proximal convoluted tubule is still the part that's closer or comes off of the renal corpuscle. But you have to kind of follow it to find the loop of Henle, which extends down to the medulla, and then the distal convoluted tubule, which is past the loop of Henle on its way to the collecting duct. Okay, so we've got the collecting duct right here. We've got the renal corpuscle right here. We have the proximal convoluted tubule here, the distal convoluted tubule here, and the loop of Henle here. So those are the parts of the nephron. Now this slide is showing you the different parts of the blood supply that go to the nephron. Okay, so we know that about the renal artery that goes into the kidney to begin with. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it becomes the afferent arteriole, which enters the glomerulus. That blood has its plasma pulled out, and then it continues to what is called the efferent arteriole. And then that efferent arteriole continues around and becomes all of these peritubular capillaries until we get to venules, and then finally the renal vein. Okay, so the renal vein leaves the kidney and goes back to the heart, because we have basically fed all of these tissues the oxygen, which is a separate and disconnected physiological process that we've already talked about with the respiratory system. Think of it as just any other body tissue. The internal respiration has happened here. We've dropped off oxygen, replaced it with carbon dioxide, as we're actually feeding the tissues that allow the nephron to do its job, which is what we're talking about right now, okay? We're talking about how the nephron reabsorbs and secretes stuff until you end up with a filtrate that you excrete as urine, okay? What was I going to do here? Oh, peritubular capillaries. I wanted to make sure that we didn't forget about that term, okay? Peritubular capillaries, very important. All right, peritubular as in around the tubes, okay? Around the tubes, around the tubules. Okay, so this is what a nephron really kind of looks like. And you'll notice here also the collecting duct has multiple branches here. Each one of these goes to another nephron, okay? From a nephron, from a nephron, okay? So collecting ducts are shared by multiple nephrons. So technically collecting ducts aren't part of one nephron, okay? All right, let's take a closer look at the renal corpuscle and the glomerulus and how this actually all works, okay? So the renal corpuscle, again, is the whole thing. The glomerulus is the this little ball of capillaries inside of the glomerular capsule. Which is not actually really labeled here, okay? The afferent arteriole goes in, and the blood from it gets filtered, as in the plasma gets pulled out into the capsular space, okay? Which will end up going into the proximal convoluted tubule. The red blood cells and the white blood cells and the platelets, that all stays in there and emerges through the efferent arteriole, which continues on to become those peritubular capillaries, which are wrapped all around this, okay? Notice how the afferent arteriole is wider, it's bigger from here to here than the efferent arteriole. The efferent arteriole is smaller. This is really, really important. The efferent arteriole, not just because you're going to have to be able to identify them from each other, so the afferent is always bigger, the efferent is always smaller, but functionally, it should make sense to you why this is, and I'll tell you why this is. The efferent arteriole is narrower and smaller so that the blood coming in through the afferent arteriole has to spend more time in the glomerulus. It creates pressure inside of the glomerular capsule. Okay, so if blood is coming in faster than it's leaving, then you will have an increase in pressure here inside of the glomerular capsule. That pressure is what allows plasma to be basically sucked out of these capillaries into the intercapillary, or sorry, the intercapsular space, or the capsular space, okay? This other stuff here, this is called the juxtaglomerular complex. I'm not going to ask you to know very much about it, but what's interesting about it is that this is basically the ascending limb of the loop of Henle coming up in between the afferent and the efferent arterioles. Okay, so basically it's like the in between the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the distal convoluted tubule, you've got a portion of this tube that comes up in between the afferent and efferent arterioles. Okay, so you can't really see it from here, but if one of these is the afferent arteriole and the other one is the efferent, you've got a portion that's coming up in between those. Where they meet, or where they're up against each other, you have a difference in the cells, which is really, really important in maintaining your blood pressure. So the juxtaglomerular complex is important for maintaining blood pressure. The male cane, sorry. Okay, so by basically dilating and constricting the efferent and afferent arterioles to change the amount of pressure inside of the glomerulus. So if you are going to increase the pressure inside the glomerulus, if you need to like work overtime trying to get toxins out or something, you will actually constrict the efferent and dilate the afferent so that you increase that pressure inside of the glomerulus, which also in turn is going to increase your blood pressure overall, because all of your blood is going to end up going through these nephrons. It's going to end up going through these glomeruli, right? So that blood is basically getting backed up and it's creating pressure throughout the rest of your body. This is part of the reason why salt increases your blood pressure. So sodium chloride actually causes dilation of the afferent and constriction of the efferent, which increases your blood pressure. And then vice versa. If you can constrict the afferent and dilate the efferent as much as they can to kind of take the pressure off inside of the glomerular capsule, and will also help to decrease your blood pressure as well. Okay. Here is a slide of some kidney or renal tissue, which is really cool. This terminology is all the same. I just want to show you what this looks like. So you literally have the glomerulus on the inside and the glomerular capsule on the outside. Right. And in between, you have that capsular space. Glomerular capsular space. Which is where the plasma that's being pulled out of these capillaries goes into before it gets funneled into that proximal convoluted tubule, okay? Which you can't really see from here because we have no idea when you're making a histology slide, you don't know like what angle you're getting it at. It would be a miraculous near impossibility to actually get a slide where you can actually see a nephron in full profile view. but I'll show you some common ones. So here again is Dr. Lee's histology lab, virtual lab. Let's take a look at some kidney tissue here, which is pretty cool. We can do this. We can already see, well, we've got lots and lots of tubules here, right? So some of them we can actually see in the, like a lengthwise cross section, kind of in this region over here, which is pretty fascinating. And then you also can see a lot of tubules in a transverse cross section. So basically if you snip them like this, and that's basically these little guys here, you can, urologists can tell the difference between the distal and proximal convoluted tubules in cross section like this, because the cuboidal epithelium looks slightly different. But I cannot, and I will not ask you to be able to do that. This is probably a large blood vessel. And this is a renal corpuscle with the glomerulus in the center, the capsular space, which is this white line all around it, which is surrounded by the glomerular capsule, which is just a little connective tissue membrane surrounding it. And all around it, we've got all of these cross-section of the surrounding tubules, which is pretty crazy. How cool is that, right? Very, very cool. All right. We have a couple of other ones too, if you want to explore that. And don't forget that you also can see the annotations on these. So you can literally find a particular part. This apparently is a section of the loop of Henle. I will not ask you to be able to identify that visually, but I would like you to be able to identify the like a portion of the nephron, a glomerulus. Can we just get a glomerulus? Is that just too, that's too simplified. That's okay. But like I said, they can tell the difference between the distal and proximal convoluted tubules, which is pretty fascinating. But if I were to show you a picture like this, oh, actually you can see, okay, so this is probably that juxtaglomerular apparatus, that complex there. But this is the glomerulus, the capsular space, and the glomerular capsule surrounding it. So those are the three things really that I would like for you to be able to identify in a histology slide like this, okay? All right, moving on. Ooh, one more electro micrograph image of the same thing. So this is basically the, all of the nephron tissue, the connective tissue has been removed, and this is all just blood vessel tissue, okay? So this is glomeruli. Each one of these is a glomerulus, and you can see an afferent and an efferent arteriole entering and leaving each one, which is pretty awesome. But this is a very, very fine, very, very zoomed in microscopic image of like molecular level image of basically the cortex of your kidneys. This is the renal cortex. Pretty awesome. Okay, so let's go in a little bit more detail about the filtration, reabsorption, secretion, and excretion portions. So the filtration, again, occurs in the renal corpuscle, okay? So that is the pulling of the plasma, which is going to be, and all of the stuff that's in it, which is gonna be these the little purple beads here, out of the glomerulus and into the glomerular capsule space, or the capsular space within the glomerular capsule. And then it's going to go into the proximal convoluted tubule, which is where you actually have reabsorption starting to happen here, okay? So F is for filtration at the glomerulus. Look at the afferent arteriole and how much bigger it is. Then the efferent arteriole, going in through the afferent and leaving via the efferent. to go on and become the peritubular capillaries. Reabsorption and secretion begins to become a thing in the proximal convoluted tubule, okay? In the proximal convoluted tubule, you're going to have water, ions, and other molecules being brought back into the bloodstream. This is reabsorption, okay? This is the important bit right here. And we've got water, ions, and other molecules that we want to keep, right? We want them to come back into the body, to stay in the body. We've removed everything out of the closet in the glomerulus, and now we're starting to put stuff back. So we're putting back stuff that we want to keep. And most of the stuff we're putting back, we're actually putting back most of the stuff. Everything else continues on down into the loop of Henle, where you are going to also have reabsorption, mostly of water and salts. Okay. And loop of Henle. Okay. Secretion starts to begin to be more prominent in this distal convoluted tubule before we get to the collecting duct. Okay. So secretion is this S part. This is what we're focusing on here. We are secreting stuff out of the blood and into the nephron. So basically it's almost like your little sister brings in all of her junk to add to your pile of stuff that's going to Goodwill. Okay, so like you brought everything out of the closet, you start putting the stuff that you want back, everything else is gonna go to Goodwill. Then you're gonna start like taking more stuff from around the house and putting it into the Goodwill pile. This is what you do, right? This is what we do. We're putting it in the Goodwill pile, it's going to leave the body. So basically it's like a second chance for your body to decide, we don't really want as much of this. Let's go ahead and secrete it back into the nephron and we'll excrete it as urine. And then finally, excretion is going to be everything from the collecting duct outside of the body. So to the renal pelvis, to the ureter, to the bladder, to the urethra, and gone, okay? Important to note, if you're reabsorbing stuff back into the bloodstream, then it is probably good things. Water, ions, and like nutrient, positive nutrient molecules, stuff that we want. If you are secreting stuff into the nephron, that's stuff you don't want. So that's going to be your hydrogen ions, because we're keeping the blood from getting too acidic, various drugs and toxins, okay? And then excretion is all of this bad stuff, plus a bunch of water, which is gonna flush it out of the body. Okay, so this little guy, so this is all the same verbiage over here, so don't worry about that. This little image I wanted to show you because it indicates exactly like how much of your plasma gets filtered, right? So your plasma going into the afferent arteriole is 100% of that blood plasma. Leaving through the efferent arteriole is 80% of that blood plasma. So only 20% of that plasma that enters the glomerulus actually gets pulled out. Okay, so you pull out 20% technically of the plasma to be filtered. About 19% of that gets reabsorbed back into the blood, which means that only about 1% of everything that gets filtered out of the glomerulus is actually excreted as urine. Very, very little. But this happens in so many nephrons, millions of nephrons in each of your kidneys, that you end up with, you know, a good amount of urine that you excrete on a daily basis. Here is a detailed chart showing you exactly what types of things are reabsorbed, secreted in various parts of the nephron, okay? So you've got in the proximal convoluted tubule, you've got your glucose, so your sugars you're going to bring back in to the bloodstream. Amino acids you're going to bring it back into the bloodstream. Salts, probably. Calcium ions, You're going to want those. Potassium ions, you're going to want those to make action potentials, right? Very important. Bicarbonate ions, which are going to be helping to make the blood more basic. So that's going to help to buffer your blood. And water. So you're going to, after you've pulled it out in the glomerulus, you're probably going to want to take that stuff back and put it back into the blood. While at the same time in this proximal convoluted tubule, you're going to be secreting stuff from the blood back into the nephron, like uric acid, those hydrogen ions, and various drugs and stuff, whatever didn't get caught in the glomerulus. Now in the loop of Henle, which goes down into the medulla, right, of the kidney, you're going to be reabsorbing, you're going to be pulling water out of the nephron, you're going to be reabsorbing that back into those paratubular capillaries that are surrounding the all of the nephron. More salts, you're going to be keep taking that salt back and putting it back in the blood and your calcium ions. When you get to the distal convoluted tubule, you're going to continue pulling stuff back out into the bloodstream. And this is going to be more and more fine-tuned in terms of what your body has at the moment and what it needs at the moment. And you're going to be also dumping potassium ions and hydrogen ions, which are excess hydrogen ions and excess potassium ions back into the nephron. And then finally in the collecting duct, we have last chance to reabsorb water. Bring that water back if you don't want to pee it out, and salts and calcium. Okay, so if you have excess calcium in the body, we learned back in the skeletal system, I think briefly we talked about controls of blood calcium. This is one of them. So you're going to excrete it in the urine if you have excessive blood calcium that you have over and above the amount that you could deposit into your bones, right? So if you still have too much calcium, you can excrete it. So this is only if you have lots and lots of calcium. Okay. Antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone. So a diuretic is something that dehydrates you, right? Which basically means that it's taking water out of your body and secreting it into the nephron because it's going to become urine. Antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that helps you to retain water. Okay, it's important that it does this. It is responsible for the water reabsorption that occurs at the collecting duct. Okay, so this water that's coming back in to the bloodstream from the collecting duct, it is the antidiuretic hormone that allows that to happen. With ADH, the collecting duct becomes permeable with water, which is what we're seeing here. Okay. And you produce small quantities of urine because your urine is usually mostly water, right? If it's very, very concentrated, then there's less water. You didn't excrete as much, you held on to more of it. You want your urine to be, you want your body to be able to concentrate your urine, but if your urine is very concentrated, and you can tell because it will be darker in color and it will be much more odorific, it'll be much smellier, and there will probably be less of it. It probably means that you're dehydrated. So it's basically removed as much water as it feels like it's safe to remove from your bloodstream. And there still isn't enough to dilute your urine to be the nice, clear to very, very light green or yellow and not very smelly urine, sterile urine that it's supposed to be. So that antidiuretic hormone, if you are hydrated enough, will remove that excess water out of the urine and keep it in your body. Actually, and if you're more dehydrated, then it's going to do that more and make your urine more concentrated. Without ADH, or if ADH, antidiuretic hormone, is inhibited, then you have a situation where, oops, I got my figures mixed up. You have a situation where the collecting duct is now not permeable to water. Okay, so this is actually, forgive my confusion. I thought we were going in the opposite direction here with the picture. With ADH, much, much more H2O is getting pulled out of the collecting duct and back into the bloodstream, okay? Which is good. You want to keep that water in your body so that you don't get dehydrated, right? Okay, yeah, so if you're pulling it out of the collecting duct, then there's less for it to become urine. If you are keeping it in the collecting duct, in which case ADH is not doing its job, then you are going to pee out all of your water because you are not reabsorbing it back into the bloodstream, okay? This is going to be a more dilute urine compared to the more concentrated urine if you're pulling all that water out of the filtrate in the nephron, right? So different diuretics function in different ways. If you have high glucose levels, then we're talking about osmosis. So if you have a lot of a high concentration of solutes in your blood, then the water kind of wants to go there. It kind of wants to go to where the solute concentration is highest, right? So just like the experiment that we did in Bio 50A, if you had wet labs when you took Bio 50A, or Bio 1, if you had wet labs when you took Bio 1, we did an experiment where you watched osmosis in glucose water compared to deionized or just straight filtered water. We saw that the glucose water had, or the cell with glucose water in it, had that DI water go in, right? It was a hypotonic solution. That is the cause for more water being basically pulled out of the urine and being hoarded in the body because you're getting dehydrated. Alcohol literally inhibits the release of antidiuretic hormone. This is why you, when you drink a beer and you break the seal, then you have to pee all the time. It's because, not because you broke the seal. I'm not even sure if that's like really a thing, but drinking alcohol makes you have to pee because it inhibits your antidiuretic hormone, which causes your collecting duct to not reabsorb water. Therefore, all of the water gets peed out. It stays in the nephron and it gets peed out. And then caffeine and diuretic drugs are going to work by inhibiting sodium ion reabsorption. Okay, so basically, if that sodium ion reabsorption doesn't happen, then the water wants to go back into the collecting duct, and then you pee it out. There you go. I think I misspoke with the high glucose levels. Those high glucose levels are inside of the nephron, therefore in the collecting duct, and water will get carried out with it. So it's osmosis just in the opposite direction, causing dehydration and enhanced urinary output. Okay, so you're peeing more. A diuretic makes you pee more, which means you're peeing all your water out, which means you're getting dehydrated. Okay, the rest of the urinary system is called the collecting system, and it includes the ureters, which are what travel out of the kidney from those renal pelvises and carry that filtrate to the urinary bladder, okay? So the ureters carry that filtrate from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. And the urethra is the tube that goes from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body, okay? Some other stuff that we need to know. I mean, yes, ideally we would recognize these things. Okay. So your ureters actually look like this in a transverse cross section. They are collapsed most of the time when they are not actually pushing urine through. Urine is like mostly constantly trickling through at any given time. You do have a little bit of smooth muscle going on in the muscularis. So you have the same 3 layers as you do for your GI tract or your digestive system, as we'll see. So you have your mucosa on the inside, which is a mucus secreting epithelial tissue. You have a muscularis layer sandwiched in the middle, which contains smooth muscle. And then you have an adventitia, which is just an external layer, which is going to be connective tissue, which is covering the whole thing. The smooth muscle does allow for peristaltic contractions, which is basically just like if you took a tube and you the muscles basically contracted in a ring that travels down the tube, basically like squeezing that liquid down the tube. The smooth muscle is going to do that. And it does it in response to stretch mechanoreceptors. So you've got mechanoreceptors in the walls of the ureters that when they sense stretching of the ureter, that means that liquid is starting to come down via gravity, they will then start to contract and squeeze that liquid down. Peristalsis is the name for that muscle contraction rhythm or pattern, and we'll talk more about it in the digestive system, okay? The ureters enter the bladder. If this is an anterior view that you're looking at, the ureters will enter the bladder from behind and slightly underneath. This is important because when the bladder expands, it actually causes the ureter opening into the bladder to get pinched closed so that you don't overfill the bladder. Okay. The bladder itself is a really cool organ. We're finally talking about it after all of these weeks and months after we talked about histology back in Bio 50A, when we talked about the specific type of epithelial tissue that is the mucosa of the bladder. So the inside walls of the bladder are kind of folded, and we call that folding. These folds are called rugae, and we'll come across this term again with the digestive system as well. The rugae help to basically give the bladder more surface area for stretching, right? So if it's empty, then you're going to see the rugae. It's going to be very folded up. And then as it expands, the rugae will flatten out until it's full. But in addition to that, the actual epithelial tissue that the rugae is made out of is transitional epithelial tissue, which was that one type of epithelial tissue that is only found in the bladder for the most part. And it also has the ability to stretch. As an epithelial tissue, it is still considered mucosa. So that's why we don't have like elastic connective tissue there. We still want to definitely have epithelial tissue there because urine is acidic, right? So we want to protect the tissues here. So having a mucosa there allows for you to basically protect the tissue, keep the acid from eating away the walls of your bladder. The rugae are the folds of the inner wall. The bladder itself has this sort of like flattened triangular shape when it's empty. And then as it fills, it turns into this upside down pear shape. So it actually like fills and like gets taller as it fills, which is kind of cool. It can hold about a pint of urine before you start to hurt. And the ureter entries, which again are kind of, they're posterior and a little bit inferior, so they come around and behind the bladder. Those two entry points, plus the exit for the urethra, form a triangle called the trigon. And the trigon is important because this is an area where you can have a lot of bacterial overgrowth leading to urinary tract infection, right? Note also that the urethra, which is the tube going from the bladder to the exterior of the body to outside, is much longer in males than it is in females, right? For obvious reasons, right? The urethra in males serves a dual purpose, right? So it excretes urine, but it also has ejaculate travel through it occasionally. Female urethras only excrete urine. You only have urine coming out of there. You have a separate hole for peeing and a separate hole to give birth out of, right? So you have two different holes. You don't pee out of your vagina. You have a urethra and you have a vagina. It is only 3 to 4 centimeters long in females, which contributes to the fact that females tend to have a lot more bladder infections than males do. This is because the urethra is very, very close to both the vaginal opening and the anus, right? And each of those have their own sets of microorganisms, bacteria, right? Good bacteria and bad bacteria, but either way, bacteria that really doesn't belong in the bladder. But with this short, tiny urethra that females tend to have, you are going to have a much shorter distance for that bacteria to travel up the urethra and settle here in the trigon area and create a UTI, which is, as most of us know, very, very uncomfortable. To prevent UTIs, I'm actually going to talk about that next, after we look at this cross section of the same structures. Okay, so we've got a lot of differences between males and females. Here from the front, in this frontal section, and from this profile or sagittal section, we can see that the bladder is, it's in front. So it's in front of the uterus for females, in front of the rectum for males. So in front of both the uterus and the rectum for females. It's going to be right up against your, that pubic bone, your pubic symphysis, remember, from your skeletal system. Here is the short urethra of females, the long urethra of males, which includes both in sort of a more interior part and a more exterior part, but either way, we are coming from here and traveling out that way, and you're traveling here and out that way. Notice, ladies, that you have 1, 2, 3 holes. Boys, you've got 2. What else is there here? Here's the ureter traveling up here in the male, the ureter traveling up in the female, urinary bladder, urinary bladder. You have an external sphincter and an internal sphincter. Do we have the internal here? It's not shown here on the male, but both males and females have an internal sphincter and an external urethral urinary sphincter. Okay, so the urethral sphincters are what help you to control your bladder and when you decide to empty it. The internal sphincter is controlled by your autonomic nervous system, so it is involuntary. It's smooth muscle, involuntary. The external sphincter is the one that you have control over. So if you're holding your urine, it is the external sphincter that you're actually holding closed, and you're able to do that. Probably because you're young and healthy and have never been catheterized. But if you have been catheterized, or if you are a little bit older, you may experience incontinence because that external sphincter, or the internal, combination of both possibly, aren't working as well. So here's the autonomic part for the internal sphincter, which is passively contracted when your bladder is empty or filling, okay? Your external sphincter is going to stay contracted. You don't really have to think about it. You're not always thinking about it when your bladder is empty or filling, right? So your external sphincter stays contracted thanks to your autonomic nervous system plus higher CNS input, which is basically your voluntary brain. And when your bladder is full, this internal sphincter is going to open on its own, and thanks to an autonomic reflex. But your external sphincter will be voluntarily opened by you when you are ready, unless you waited much too long, right? Okay. So I don't need you to know the details about this. I just really want you to know about the internal and external sphincter, that the internal is involuntary and the external is voluntary. Okay. Okay. Okay, so disorders. Renal calculi is the fancy name for kidney stones. Nephrolithiasis, lith as in a stone, lith is a term for stone, means that you have a stone in the kidney itself, like it's built up in the nephron itself, which is extremely painful and bad for you. You can have this treated by, you can take something internally, which will help to break it up. It's usually calcium. That's the issue here. So too high blood calcium can cause that calcium to basically mineralize inside the kidney, and then you end up with these little mineral deposits that turn into basically stones because they're little rocks, little mineral rocks. Or they have therapy where they'll actually like take a machine and hold it next to your kidney from the outside and like vibrate it. And they can actually send in pulse waves that vibrate those kidney stones and can break them up small enough that they can be passed with the urine. Ureter olithiasis is going to be a lith or a kidney stone or a renal calculi that occurs in the ureter, okay, versus in the nephron. Either way, they're very painful to pass. They scratch on the way down your ureters, and then they're very painful to pass through the urethra as well. So make sure that you stay hydrated because that is the #1 way that you can prevent this from happening. Renal calculi occur because your urine is too concentrated, right? The filtrate is too concentrated, specifically too concentrated with calcium, but if you're drinking enough water, then you should be able to keep it dilute enough that crystals cannot form, okay? UTI, urinary tract infection. Again, it affects a lot of women because of their short urethras and the proximity of the urethral opening to the vaginal opening and the anus. Causative factors can be sexual activity. So anything that goes on down there that might transfer stuff from the vaginal opening or the anus to around the urethra can give you a bladder infection. You can prevent this by urinating before and after sex. Drinking lots of water all the time, no matter what, will always be flushing out that urethra. So anything that might have gotten up in there will get flushed out. So stay hydrated, wipe front to back, and urinate before and or after sex, okay, to avoid UTIs, because they are the worst. Urinary incontinence can be caused by giving birth to a child. Surgery can cause it because if you're catheterized, then you are at a greater risk. If you impede the normal flow of urine, then your body gets confused, and sometimes that's what kind of messes up your little external and internal sphincters. And then nervous system problems can also cause or contribute to urinary incontinence. I didn't know a lot of details about this, but I'm curious about it. Might be a good question for our discussion. Hint, hint. What is the deal with that? Stress, I think, is a big one. So sympathetic nervous system disorders, possibly. Urine retention, so being unable to urinate. This is something that we hear about a lot in males that need to get checked for prostate cancer. Okay, so the reason for this is that if you look both here and here, the urethra passes straight through the prostate gland in males. So if the prostate gland has a cancer, has a tumor on it, or if it's inflamed or basically gets any bigger than it is, then it can pinch off the urethra and basically the bladder cannot empty, which would be awful. It also can be a thing after anesthesia. So again, takes a little bit for the sphincters to recalibrate with your sympathetic nervous system after you've been put under for some reason. And again, that's prostate hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is in like, gets too big. Okay. And then finally, bladder cancer, which is caused by carcinogens that end up in the urine. So that can really kind of be anything. So any of those toxins that you're filtering out of the blood and putting into the urine, if they are carcinogenic, then they will, of course, sit in the bladder for a certain period of time and come into contact with the mucosa of the bladder, which can affect those epithelial cells and possibly make them cancerous. Blood in the urine may be a sign of that, but blood in the urine along with pain could also be a sign of renal calculi too, or a UTI. So don't freak out if you have blood in your urine, but get it checked out so that you can get on some antibiotics if you have a UTI, or do whatever you need to do to get rid of those kidney stones, because they're the worst. If you go on antibiotics for a UTI, PSA, make sure you take probiotics afterwards, because if you wipe out your gut bacteria with an antibiotic, you may take away the bacterial infection in your bladder, but you have also wiped out all the good bacteria that keep the bad bacteria at bay normally. So take your probiotics to reconstitute that good bacteria so that you'll have a healthy system to prevent infection later on. It basically leaves you vulnerable every time that you take antibiotics. So take your probiotics. All right, you guys, I'm going to leave it at that. Try to keep that one into one lecture video. I'm sorry it was so long, but since we've got both urinary and digestive to cover this week, thought I'd squeeze it in. So I will see you over for our first half of the digestive system lecture for this week, and then I will see you on Thursday to dissect kidneys and look at slides of both the urinary and digestive systems. Signing off.